You walk into your garden, check on your crops, and see something incredibly frustrating. Those vibrant, healthy flowers you admired just yesterday have started to shrivel, detach, and fall to the ground, leaving empty stems behind. It feels like a betrayal. You put in weeks of labor, watering the soil, applying fertilizers, and shielding the plant from pests, only for the plant to seemingly give up right before it produces food. The immediate reaction most of us have is to assume the plant is diseased, dying, or fundamentally broken. But to understand what is actually happening, we have to look at this from the plant's perspective. Producing fruit requires a massive amount of internal energy. It acts as a heavy biological tax on the plant's stored resources. When environmental conditions become unstable, the plant stops focusing on expansion and turns into a ruthless accountant. To avoid completely depleting its reserves, it actively severs the connection to its own flowers. These fallen petals represent a highly calculated liquidation of assets, an emergency measure used to preserve the plant's long-term survival. The biological math starts with reproduction. For a flower to become a fruit, it absolutely requires the physical transfer of pollen from the male part of a flower to the female part. In most gardens, insects like bees and butterflies act as the necessary brokers for this transaction. By landing on a bloom and disturbing a cloud of pollen, they trigger the fertilization process. If your garden lacks insect activity, that tiny physical transfer never happens. The flower simply sits dormant on the stem, unfertilized and waiting. The plant quickly recognizes that maintaining this unfertilized bloom is a constant drain on its reserves. Since the flower now serves no purpose, the plant cuts off the nutrient supply and drops it. It is a strict cost-benefit analysis. The plant will not fund an expensive reproductive cycle that has a 0% chance of generating offspring. Pollinators aren't the only variable. External stressors can also crash the plant's internal economy, starting with extreme weather. Both sudden heat waves and unexpected cold snaps directly attack the reproductive cycle. This diagram illustrates exactly how weather disrupts that cycle. Whether temperatures peak into the red or drop down into the blue, the thermal shock causes the physical structure of the pollen to fracture and break apart. Once the pollen is sterilized, fertilization becomes impossible, even if insects are actively visiting the plant. Erratic moisture acts as a second hidden stressor. Alternating between periods of severe drought and heavy flooding sends shock waves through the plant's root system. Faced with unpredictable water access, the plant halts its growth phase entirely. It enters a strict survival mode, shedding its energy-demanding flowers to protect its core structural health. Sometimes, though, the stress comes directly from us. One of the most common errors gardeners make is the over-application of nitrogen-heavy fertilizers. This animated scale shows how that imbalance plays out. Adding too much nitrogen weighs the system down, forcing the plant to aggressively multiply its green leaves. This comes at the direct expense of phosphorus and potassium, the exact nutrients sitting on the other side of the scale, which the plant requires to sustain its flowers. In every one of these scenarios, whether from fluctuating weather, inconsistent watering, or an unbalanced diet, the plant prioritizes its immediate physical survival over future fruit production. Some instances of flower drop have nothing to do with stress at all. Plants act as pragmatic risk managers, intentionally overproducing blooms as a biological backup plan. The plant calculates its total carrying capacity, exactly how much fruit its roots and stems can actually support. It then deliberately sheds the weakest, smallest blooms so it can funnel all its available energy into developing the most viable fruits. Seeing a small fraction of your flowers falling to the ground while the rest thrive is actually an active, healthy strategy for maximizing the quality of the final harvest. Panicking over dropping flowers is unnecessary once you know how to read the plant's internal balance sheet. Instead of worrying, you can step in to stabilize the conditions. You can start by planting brightly colored companion flowers near your crops to actively recruit necessary pollinators back into the garden. Next, regulate the resources. Maintain a strictly consistent watering routine to prevent root shock, and switch to balanced fertilizers that provide the essential phosphorus and potassium required during the reproductive phase. Above all, practice patience. Plants operate on their own distinct timelines. Once environmental conditions stabilize, they will rewrite their energy budgets and begin producing fruit. Gardening is a responsive, economic conversation with nature, where the gardener's role is helping the plant balance its internal checkbook. When that checkbook finally balances, the results are incredible. If you're curious about the exact microscopic biological processes that ignite inside a stem the moment a fruit finally begins to form, you'll want to watch our next video.